Night of the Living Dead Outbreak 2. Florida, NASA. Mission Control. Wednesday, August 8th, 2018. The NASA engineers were monitoring a space probe that they sent up a few years ago called the Venus probe. Its mission was to collect radiation samples from Earth's cloud-covered twin. The operation was going well until they lost contact with the probe in the middle of last year. But now the NASA engineers have located the probe. It was sending a message. Somehow, some way, the probe was coming back to Earth, and it was registering a high level of a yet unknown form of radiation. Worried that this thing was going to crash, the leader of the communication center ordered that the probe be detonated, and one lone engineer did, as he typed in the computer commands for the probe to self-destruct. After he did that, he hit the button to transmit it to the probe. Well, it worked, but it also didn't work at the same time. The probe did detonate, but as the engineer learned that the probe had detonated in the lower mesosphere near the border of the stratosphere. Sunday, August 12th, 2018. It was around 6 o'clock in the morning that one young man by the name of Fenton Arden was getting up for work. He hated going to work on Sundays, but he had to. He worked at the server center for Global Communications, a communication center that had contracts with several major mobile phone companies. They just provided them the servers for their internet and phone usage. Fenton heads to the bathroom and brushes his teeth and does the morning routine that he does when he gets ready for work. Afterwards, he grabs his computer bag and heads out to work. As he was driving towards his job, he was crossing over the 408 overpass. And there was a traffic light and he had to stop. As he was waiting for the light to turn green, Fenton had noticed something unusual. Usually, there's maybe a homeless man or two who are sleeping under the overpass, but he had noticed that the homeless man was awake and he seemed to be fighting another homeless man. Fenton was paying close attention to the fight. He had noticed one homeless man punch the other homeless man hard. The other homeless man fell to the ground, but he gets back up and he shambles towards the other homeless man, and they seem to be in a very bad fight. Well, Fenton noticed that the light turned green and he had to go. He drove for a little ways until he reached another stoplight. And then he quickly pulled out his cell phone and called the police to inform them of the fight underneath the 408 overpass. Then he arrives to his job in the far end of downtown Orlando. He gets out of his car and walks into the server center. There was the old janitor by the name of Paco, a Latin man who had a very bad attitude. Fenton did not like him at all. A lot of people did not like him. He had gotten into big trouble one time, and somehow, someway, he was able to keep his job. It baffled everybody. Well, Fenton walked past the janitor and he said to him, "Good morning, Paco." And Paco murmured good morning back to him. Then Fenton makes it up to his small office. He unpacks his computer bag and grabs his laptop and several USB cables, and he heads over to the massive server room. He does the morning checkup of the servers, and he was noticing there was a bit of increased traffic with internet usage and a lot of phone calls. He had noticed that the phone calls were mainly 911 calls. He thought it was a bit unusual, but he shrugged it off and got to work. Soon his other co-workers came in. Donnie, a tall, slim black man, about in his mid-20s. Roy, a tall, slim white guy in his late 20s. And Chris, another tall, slim white guy in his early 30s. Then Fenton goes over the plans on what they were doing today, and he says to the guys, well, fellas, we got to get the upgrades finished today for these servers. Mr. Terwilliger's been on my back all this week. And Donnie says to Fenton, don't worry, man. Old man Terwilliger is always getting on people's back, especially when he gets a call from the government. Then Fenton says, you're right, Donnie. But either way, we need to get this work done. And then Fenton goes on to say, Donnie, just get the new boards inside servers 25 and 26. Roy, finish the final rounds of debugs to the systems. And then the final order was to Chris, and he says, Chris, just get all the software loaded, and I'm going to perform the software upgrades. The guys acknowledge, they all begin to work. As the guys were working, Donnie says to Fenton, hey Fenton, have you noticed anything weird going on the last couple days? I mean, just weird, out of the ordinary stuff. Like today, I was driving in and I could not get one station on the radio. Fenton says to Donnie, no, I haven't noticed. I didn't have my radio on today. I have a bit of a headache, he says. Then the other guys started chiming in, talking about how they noticed there was an increase in violent crimes in the city of people getting attacked. And then Fenton just shrugs it off and says, hey, this city, something's always going weird, especially in this state alone. There was always some weirdo on the news that does something stupid and gives the state a bad name. Meanwhile, downstairs in the back alley, the janitor Paco was emptying some bins of garbage into the giant dumpster out back. As he was doing that, he had noticed a man shambling around. He looked like he was really messed up, but Paco was used to seeing the homeless trying to dig through the dumpsters for food out back. As he was done throwing everything away, he decides to shoo away the homeless guy, and he says, Get out before I call the police. Well, the man that he tried to shoo away suddenly shambled towards him and began to attack him. Paco's like, Get off of me! Oh, God! Stop! Get off of me! He says, shouting. Suddenly, the man bit him right where the shoulder meets the neck. The janitor lets out a loud scream, and he punches the homeless man in the face, and the homeless man let go. And then Paco was holding on to the bite wound that he had received in the area where the neck meets the shoulder, and he says to the man that attacked him, oh, you want to fight? Okay, I'll fight you, he says. And then the janitor goes into his pocket and pulls out a switchblade. He then attacks the homeless man that attacked him, stabbing him in the stomach the first time. As he did that, he pulls a knife out. The homeless man was not fazed by the stabbing. He's like, what the? Then the homeless man looked at Paco, and Paco had noticed that the homeless man's eyes were clouded over white. And then the homeless man opens his mouth and lunges towards Paco for another bite. Ah! A little while later, inside the giant server room, the guys were finished doing their jobs, and Roy looks at his smartwatch and sees it was 11:45, and he says to Fenton, hey Fenton, I'm going out to have a quick smoke. Fenton's like, okay. And then Roy makes his way out to the back by the dumpster. As he arrived to his destination, he pulls out his e-cigarette and begins to vape, letting out big puffs. It was relaxing to him. As Roy was vaping away, he could always hear the sound of the downtown traffic in the back alley. But he was noticing something. He was noticing the sound of a lot of sirens, police and fire sirens. I mean, downtown is always full of the sound of sirens, but this was more than usual, especially on a Sunday. And he wondered to himself, I wonder what's going on. Well, after he had finished vaping, he had noticed on the other side of the dumpster a pair of legs sticking out from the other end, like somebody was laying down. He recognized the shoes and the pants. It was Paco's. And then he decided to go over to see if Paco was okay. As he walked over, he shouts, "Yo, Paco, are you okay, man?" And as Roy rounds the corner of the dumpster where he saw Paco's legs sticking out, then he saw the horrific sight. Paco was on the ground all right, but he was not okay. He saw the man that attacked him over him, eating him, and he says aloud, "Oh dear God, what the hell?" And then he backs away quickly. The assailant that was eating Paco stops when he hears Roy. He looks up to Roy, and Roy sees his clouded eyes, and the assailant lets out a moan. And then he goes back to eating Paco's face. And then Roy says, "Oh shit," and he runs back inside the building. Roy comes to the offices where the guys were at, and he says, guys, it's Paco, he's dead." All the other guys stood up in shock and say, "What?" together. And then Roy explains everything, saying, "Oh my God, dude, there's some guy hopped up probably on bath salts eating Paco's face, man." And Fenton says, "Okay, Roy, calm down. And Roy screams at Fenton, "No, I'm not going to calm down, man. There's some guy hopped up on drugs or probably crazy that's eating Paco's face to the bone, and his eyes are clouded over white." Then Donnie's like, "Clouded over white? What was he, a zombie? What is this, a horror film?" Then Fenton was trying to calm everybody down. He says, "All right, fellas, let's calm down. Let's be rational. First things first, we're calling the police." So Fenton goes over to his desk and picks up the phone, and he dials 911. And then the operator asks him what was going on, and Fenton explained everything. And the 911 operator told Fenton that they were going to be there when they can, that they're swamped with calls. Fenton was puzzled, and he says, "All right, thank you," and he hangs up his desk phone and stood there with a big look of puzzlement in his face. And Roy's like, "Let me guess, they're not coming." Then Fenton says, "Okay, the 911 operator told me, as you explained to the guys, that they're going to send a guy when they can because they're swamped." And Roy shouts again at Fenton, "Uh-huh, they're swamped, huh? I betcha they are," screams Roy, and he says to the guys, "When I was outside vaping, I had noticed an increase of noise of police sirens and fire sirens, so something's definitely going on, and now I'm starting to think that what happened to Paco outside is connected." And Donnie's like, "Oh crap, that's scary." And then Chris says, "Shouldn't we lock the doors just to be on the safe side?" And then Fenton says, "That's a good idea, Chris." And then he says, "All right, guys, I'll go lock the doors. You guys head to the lounge and turn on the TV and see if there's anything on the news," he says. And then Fenton goes down and locks all the doors in the facility. And then he goes back to the offices, and then he goes into the employee lounge, and the guys were glued to the TV, and he asked one of the guys, "So, what's going on?" And Donnie says, "Yo, dude, this is scary," he says to Fenton. And he goes on to explain, "News 13 is saying that there may be a riot here in the downtown area." And Fenton's like, "A riot here in downtown Orlando?" And Chris says, "Yes, the news is saying it." And he goes on to explain to Fenton, they said that a group of people just attack another group of people in front of a jewelry store on Livingston. And then Fenton's like, "Livingston? That's just 2 streets over from us." Then Fenton says, "Okay, I got an idea. I'm going to get a hold of my friend John." And then Roy asked, "Who's John?" And Fenton says, "John is my old friend from middle and high school. He's a cop for the Orlando Police Department. If he knows anything, he'll know what's going on," says Fenton. And Fenton grabs his smartphone and sends a text message. Then his cell phone goes off. And then Fenton answers the phone. He says, "Hello?" And then his policeman friend John says,
"Fenton, where are you at?"
And Fenton says, "I'm at work, John. What the hell's going on?" And then John says,
I don't know what's going on. I can't explain it. It's getting to be chaotic out here.
and Fenton, with worriment, says to John, "Are you okay, man?" And then John says,
I'm okay for now, but how safe and secure is your workplace?
Fenton says, "It's very secure. We're safe right now where we're at." And then John says,
Good. Stay there for the time being. You and the rest of your employees. Whatever you do, don't leave there.
and John goes on to say to Fenton on the phone,
I don't know what's going on. It seems like people are going crazy and attacking other people, and the ones they're attacking are like in a trance-like state. Their eyes are clouded over, and we're getting calls left and right for the same thing.
Then suddenly John stops and he says to Fenton on the phone,
Listen, man, I gotta go, but whatever you do, don't leave your office, and God be with you, man.
Fenton turns off his smartphone, and the guys look at Fenton and ask him, "Well, what's going on, dude?" And then Fenton says, "Well, fellas, my cop friend seems to be very afraid, and he just told me that we should stay here for the time being until whatever's going on blows over." And then Donnie says, "I can't do that. I got my wife and kid at home. They're by themselves." And then Chris says, "Yeah, my wife is home by herself too today." And Fenton says, "Okay, guys, I am not keeping you here against your will. All I'm just saying is, my friend thinks it's just a better idea that we stay here for the time being." And then Roy says, "You know what? Fenton's friend is right. It's a good idea we should stay here. I mean, not the entire time, but maybe till things calm down." Then Fenton told the rest of the guys, "You guys decide what you want to do. I'm going to go and call my parents and make sure they're okay," said Fenton. And Fenton goes over to his desk, grabs his desk phone, but then, instead of a dial tone, he heard a weird sound coming from the receiver. Fenton hangs up the phone and says, "Guys, the landline is making some weird noise. It's safe to say it's out of commission." All the other guys freak out, and then Donnie says, "Let me just try my cell phone." He pulls out his smartphone and dials his parents' house. He was able to get through on the cell phone, but nobody picked up at his parents' house. And then he hangs up and he says, "That's not good. That's not like my mom and dad. My dad always picks up the phone," he says. And then Chris says, "Well, it's Sunday. Your parents are probably out." And Fenton says to Chris, "No, because they're usually home from church at this time," he says. And then Fenton calls his parents' house again, but there was no answer. And then Fenton hangs up and he says, "I'll try again later." And then the other guys started calling their loved ones at their homes. Donnie had luck reaching his wife, who was a bit confused on what was going on in the city, and Donnie told her just to stay put at the house, keep the news on, and he'll be home as soon as he can. And Chris had success contacting his wife, and she was terrified. And Chris pretty much told her what Donnie told his wife, just to keep calm, keep the news on, and he'd be home as soon as he can. But then when Roy was trying to contact his partner, he was having no luck at first, but finally his partner answers the phone, and the guys could see that Roy was trying to calm his partner down, and he says, "Hey, I'll be home as soon as I can. Please just lock all the doors." After Roy hangs up, then he told the guys what his partner told him, and he says, "Tony says he saw a lady in the backyard this morning. He thought it was a drunk woman. He went to kind of tell her to get out of their property, and then she tried to attack him. During the attack," says Roy, "Tony pushed her down, and she fell upon an old metal pipe that was partially buried in the ground from the previous owner of the house who liked to play horseshoes with his friend." Well, Roy says, Tony says that the pipe went right through her, and instead of killing her, all she did was get back up. She didn't feel pain at all, says Roy. And then Tony freaked out and ran inside the house and locked all the doors, then called the police, and he said that the lady kept pounding against the window trying to get inside the house. Luckily, he said the police came in a few minutes and went to arrest the lady. She did fight the police. She tried to attack them, says Roy. And then he concludes saying that when the police finally got her in handcuffs, she bit one of the arresting officers in his hands, drawing blood in the process. Then Fenton asks Roy, "Well, is Tony alright?" And Roy says, "Yes, but he's very shook up. He's seeing the news what's going on." And then Fenton says to the rest of the guys, "Okay, fellas, if you want to go home now, feel free, but be super careful. We don't know how many of these assailants are around the building right now." And then Donnie asks Fenton, "What about you, Fenton?" And Fenton replies to Donnie, "Well, I gotta stay here a little longer and secure this building." So the guys agreed with Fenton, and they decided to take their chances. The three men quickly ran outside and they ran to the parking garage. It seemed like a forever walk, but each of the individual men made it to their cars and escaped. Fenton made sure the entire building was secured. He made sure every entry and exit was locked. Then he made sure the server room was working so people could still have cell phone service and internet service. Then he went up to the roof and walks over to the edge. And there he looks behind the building where the dumpster is and sees three more zombies there. They were feeding on the body of the janitor. Then Fenton looks around to the other parts of the edge to see how clear the other areas of the building were. So far, so good. Mainly the activity was in the back by the dumpster. All the other sections of the building were clear, and Fenton was making his way back to the roof access. He could hear outside the sound of distant gunshots and police and fire sirens all over. As Fenton went inside the stairwell, he paused for a brief moment and said aloud to himself, "What the Sam hell's going on here?" So he goes down the stairwell and exits the first floor. He goes to the office, grabs his laptop, puts it inside his computer bag, and then he turns off all the lights. Then he makes his way to the front entrance. He counts to 3. 1, 2, 3. And then he darts out of the door that he opened. Well, the area was pretty much clear in front still, and he ran towards a parking garage. As he runs to the garage, he saw one zombie shambling there. The zombie tried to reach for him, but Fenton was fast and just zipped right past him. And then as he gets inside the garage, he finds his car, a blue Mustang. He grabs his key, opens the door, quickly gets inside and starts the car up and drives off. As Fenton was driving, he switches the radio from XM to FM to hear the news, but the FM stations were garbled static. Then Fenton switches to AM. It was the same thing. Then he puts it back on FM. As Fenton was trying to make his way home, he encountered a lot of problems in the downtown area. On a normal good day, downtown Orlando is a nightmare to drive, but with this crisis going on, it was near impossible. There were police roadblocks just about every freaking street in the area, forcing Fenton to take a 3.5-mile detour. He was forced to go on State Road 50 until he reached the intersection of State Road 50 and 1792, a usually busy intersection even on good days. Well, Fenton managed to get the green light and made a sharp right turn onto 1792. But unfortunately, somebody was running the red light and plowed through the intersection and rear-ended Fenton's Mustang at high speed. Luckily, Fenton had a seatbelt on, and the airbags deployed. Fenton quickly took off his seatbelt and reached for his hidden gun, a small 9mm Smith & Wesson that he kept hidden in his car just in case of emergencies. Fenton slowly steps out of his Mustang and he looks towards the vehicle that rear-ended him. It was a Ford F-150, and the driver of that vehicle was also getting out slowly. Once he was out, he started to get confrontational with Fenton, and he says to Fenton, "You son of a bitch, man. You need to look where you're going. Now look what you done. I'm trying to get home to my family. You son of a bitch," he says to Fenton. And Fenton's like, "Wait a minute, buddy. I had the right of way. The light was green. You ran the red light." And then the driver of the truck sees the gun in Fenton's hand. He's like, "Oh, you want to be all tough guy macho, huh? Okay, two can play that game." Fenton, quickly fearing for his life as he saw that the man was going towards his truck to grab something, points his gun and shoots the man on his left kneecap. The man falls and lets out a shrill scream, and Fenton says to the injured man, "You brought this on yourself. Stand your ground, laws. I felt threatened for my life. You were reaching for something in your truck." And then the man says, "You asshole. Oh, God." The onlookers, who were there because of the traffic jam that was caused from the wreckage, were in shock and a little horrified because Fenton was armed. But then Fenton quickly saw something behind the traffic jam. It was a fuel truck coming in fast, and it showed no sign of stopping. Fenton quickly screams to the onlookers, "Get out the way now!" he says as he was running off. The people turn around and look and see the fuel truck coming in fast, and everyone started abandoning their parked vehicles. And then the fuel truck came crashing into the traffic jam. And sure enough, the tanker truck caught fire, and then a huge explosion occurred, causing a chain reaction, destroying all the other wrecked vehicles around it. Fenton looks at the massive explosion. He thought to himself he was lucky to survive that. But before he could say anything else, suddenly a zombie attacked him. The zombie knocked Fenton to the ground, and the two of them were wrestling on the ground. Fenton quickly grabbed his gun and pointed it into the zombie's head and shot the zombie. Afterwards, he decided to look for another vehicle. He had to find some way to get home. He looked around and around, and he finally found an old landscaping pickup truck. But by the truck was the previous owner of the vehicle, but now his head was gone. Fenton had to hold back his disgust, but he looked inside the truck and bingo, the keys were still in the ignition. And Fenton went to the back of the truck to free the trailer that contained all his equipment and vehicles for landscaping. Afterwards, he gets into the truck, starts it up, and makes his perilous journey home. On his way home, he had to slam the brakes of the truck as a group of people suddenly darted across the road. They were fleeing from something. There, Fenton saw it. It looked like a Catholic priest, but this was not an ordinary Catholic priest, for this priest was shambling towards the people he was chasing. It was a zombie, and Fenton quickly ran the zombified priest down. As Fenton made his way home, he didn't bother to stop as he ran down many other zombies that were in the middle of the roadway. Soon, Fenton made it home. His neighborhood was relatively quiet. He saw one or two shamblers around, but not enough of a threat. He finally pulls up to the driveway of his house. It was quiet, and the sun was starting to set. Fenton gets out of the truck and runs to the front door and gets inside. He quickly goes to a control panel by the fuse box near the bathroom, and it was a control panel for the hurricane shutters that he had installed in his house. Fenton hit the switch to lower the hurricane shutters down, covering all the windows in the house. Now his home was secured. He figured since these shutters were designed to withstand 130 plus mile an hour winds and debris, it could withstand a bunch of zombies trying to break in. Now, his second priority was to make sure his parents were okay. Fenton tried with the cell phone to try to get a hold of his parents, but nothing. No one was answering. He was starting to get super worried. Then Fenton decides it was time to secure the backyard. So he goes to his gun cabinet and pulls out his single barrel pump action shotgun loaded with slugs, guaranteed to take the head clean off any zombie at close range. And he takes his ammo belt and puts it around his shoulder. Then he makes his way outside to the backyard as the sun was starting to melt in the horizon. There was still a little bit of light left, and Fenton can see that his backyard was still quiet. Then he makes his way to the shed. He had a lot of junk in the shed, namely rods and scrap metal, and a blowtorch. So he grabs the metal rods and poles and reinforces a giant double gate that separated the front and backyard, as he welded metal fence poles to the gate to reinforce it to make sure nobody got through. Fenton then went on to the two other gates in the backyard that led into his backyard and repeated the same action. As when he was wrapping up reinforcing the third and final gate that a zombie had appeared as he was trying to reach over the fence from the front yard to grab Fenton. Fenton quickly turned up the blowtorch and hit the zombie in the face with flames. The zombie quickly leapt back and covered its burning face, and then Fenton turns off the torch and runs back to the other side. He runs back to the shed and takes everything he could from the shed into the house. Then his next priority was to check up on an elderly neighbor that lived behind him. Her name was Mrs. Blaylock. She was recently widowed and all alone. So Fenton grabs a step stool and goes over to the fence and puts the step stool next to the fence that separated the backyards of him and Mrs. Blaylock. Fenton steps over the step stool and leaps over the fence to Mrs. Blaylock's backyard. Fenton runs toward the back door of Mrs. Blaylock's house, and he knocks on the door. He says, "Mrs. Blaylock! Mrs. Blaylock!" When there was no answer, Fenton opened the back door. The back door was unlocked, and he quietly goes into Mrs. Blaylock's house, shotgun out, ready to shoot anything. And sure enough, it happened. Mrs. Blaylock comes charging out with a kitchen knife, and Fenton quickly moves out of the way and screams, "Mrs. Blaylock!" And then Mrs. Blaylock stopped herself short, and she says, "Oh, thank you, God in heaven, it's you, Fenton." And she gives Fenton a hug, and she says, "I thought it was one of those things. The news said that there's a outbreak of mass murder throughout the eastern seaboard right now." And Fenton says, "Darn, Mrs. Blaylock, you're safe, I'm here." And then Fenton asks her, "What's going on, Mrs. Blaylock?" And she says, "Those things, those attackers, they're all over my front yard, and one of them broke the window to the study where my late husband kept his guns, and, well, he's still in there. I quickly shut the door and locked it from the outside." And then Fenton says, "All right, Mrs. Blaylock, I'm going to take care of this assailant, but I warn you, Mrs. Blaylock, these people they're attacking, they're not living." And then Mrs. Blaylock said, "What?" And then Fenton explained to her what was going on, and she says, "That's impossible." And Fenton says, "I know that's impossible, but it's happening. I've seen enough horror movies to know what's going on." So Fenton goes to the study where the door was shut tight. He unlocks the door, and he counts to 3. 1, 2, and then the final number, 3, and he opens the door. The zombie was right there as it came towards Fenton, and then Fenton quickly let out a blast with his shotgun. The blast took the zombie's head clean off, and then Fenton went over to the broken window. Mrs. Blaylock's late husband had steel shutters put in the house too, like Fenton, but unlike Fenton, These shutters had to be put down manually, so Fenton put down the office shutters manually and secured them. And then he tells Mrs. Blaylock it was safe. Then Fenton goes around to each room of the house and puts down the shutters and secures them. And once he was done, Mrs. Blaylock thanked him. And then he says to Mrs. Blaylock, why don't you come to my house? You'll be safe there. I just reinforced all the gates into my backyard, and my steel shutters are down too, and I have weapons myself. And Mrs. Blaylock says, oh no, Fenton, I'll be fine here. I don't want to burden you, she says, because if push comes to shove and you have to flee, I'm just going to slow you down, she says. And Fenton says, damn it, Mrs. Blaylock, pardon my language, but this is no time to be stubborn. And Mrs. Blaylock says, listen to me, Fenton. I'm old. I'm almost 80. I lived my life, she says. And she continues, but you, Fenton, you're 36 years old. You still have a life ahead. And if humanity must survive, it must survive with the younger generation like you, she says. And then Fenton says, fine, Mrs. Blaylock, I will honor your wishes. And then the two head to the television in Mrs. Blaylock's living room, and they see that there were rescue stations being set up and the locations were being posted on the screen. And Fenton recognized two of the rescue stations. He recognized Lakecombe Elementary, his old school that he went as a child, was being turned into a rescue station, and a nearby church, Church of the Divinity, which is maybe a mile and a half up the road. And he says, Mrs. Blaylock, listen to me. You still have medical issues, he says to her. You have medications and everything. Please go to one of the rescue stations so you could get the help you need, he says to her. And Mrs. Blaylock says, I'm afraid not, Fenton. There's too many of those undead things in the front yard, and my car's in a garage. I just can't risk it, she says. And Fenton says, you're right, Mrs. Blaylock. It is too risky right now. And then Mrs. Blaylock says to Fenton, and remember, Fenton, more than likely they will send people to come and rescue people who are stranded in their homes. Fenton says, you may be right, Mrs. Blaylock. Suddenly, the back door opens, and the two of them look, and sure enough, it was a zombie that had come in through the back door. And Fenton says, Mrs. Blaylock, stay behind me. And Fenton runs fast and quickly shoulder rams that zombie back outside into the backyard. And then he jumps out and shoots the zombie, taking its head clean off. And Fenton can clearly see there were more zombies coming towards him. They had opened the gate and entered the backyard, and Fenton screams at Mrs. Blaylock, Mrs. Blaylock, shut the door, lock it, I'm going home. And then Fenton takes a shot at one of the other zombies, but he misses, but ends up taking the zombie's right arm off with the shotgun blast. And then he runs towards the fence and quickly leaps over the fence into his backyard and takes the step stool and runs into his house, locking the door. Of course, the remaining zombies in Mrs. Blaylock's backyard shambled towards where Fenton was running to. Now, Fenton was all alone. So Fenton quickly reinforced the back door to make sure no one breaks in, and reinforced the front door to make sure no one got in through there. Then he began moving everything into the living room of the house. He moved his gaming PC, he moved his laptops, he moved his workbench to make bullets into the living room too. The living room was going to be his little base of operations. And then Fenton goes, takes a shower, shaves, and was just hoping to God that the power does not go. Finally, Fenton sits in front of the TV to watch the news. The news was utter chaos as they're trying to make heads and tails of what's going on. What he saw was a news report detailing that a space probe named the Venus probe was detonated in the upper atmosphere of the Earth near the eastern Atlantic, and it contained a yet unknown form of radiation that they believe was causing this phenomenon. And then Fenton flipped the channel to another news station. It was pretty much relaying the same information, but then it was around the 8 o'clock hour they revealed what Fenton knew the whole time. They had revealed that the bodies of the recently dead were coming back to life and attacking the living. And then News 13 had some sort of scientist on there that they were interviewing. He explained about the grisly discovery, and he goes on the details saying on the television, well, we had a cadaver that was brought into us from a nearby hospital. The patient had died from a stroke 2 days ago, and he was brought to the medical school to be dissected. Well, it was there that we discovered that he was still alive, but not alive in the sense of you and me. He was thrashing around. He was violent. He was trying to bite and attack us. We had the specimen tied down, and we proceeded to amputate his arm and his legs. He felt little to no pain in the process, said the scientist. And then the scientist goes on to further details. Then we proceeded to remove his intestinal tract, and that too did not affect him. And then we moved on to giving him what would have been a fatal overdose to a normal person of powerful muscle relaxants and nothing. So the scientist says to the news anchor lady, in a sense, they are dead. They're just reanimated instincts. They're not capable of any higher brain functions, none. The only part of the brain that's really functioning normally is the lower part of the brain, the gel part of the brain, the part that we inherited from our ancient reptilian ancestors, said the scientist. And then the news anchor lady says to the scientist, so you can't reason with them, you can't really communicate with them, they don't understand. The scientist then answers the anchor lady and he says, yes, remember people, as he looked directly to the camera, these are not your friends or family anymore. They will not listen to your pleas and your attempts to reason with them. All they're going to do is going to try to eat you. Then the anchor lady asked the scientist, so how long does reanimation occur after death? And the scientist said, well, for one thing we know already is that anyone that dies from anything, you could say a gunshot wound or a broken neck, long as it's not something that damages the brain or destroys the brain, they will come back as a zombie within maybe a couple minutes. We don't have a definite time of reanimation yet. And the anchor lady, shocked, says to the scientist, well, Dr. Ventura, that does not give anyone time to make any funeral arrangements. And the scientist says, no, if anyone in your home or where you're sheltered at dies from anything, they will come back. And he continues saying, so I recommend if that happens, destroy the brain, either by bashing in their skulls or decapitate them, take out their heads, he says. And then the anchor lady asks the scientist, then Dr. Ventura, what about these reports that we're getting about any bites and scratch from these zombies causing serious illness and death? The scientist then answers the anchor lady, well, the human mouth is dirty, that's all I can say, and we're just still studying this thing as it keeps unfolding, he says to her. Then Fenton gets up from the chair and he goes over to the next room where he uses his cell phone to try to reach his parents again, but nothing, no answer. Then Fenton returns to the living room and sits down on the couch, and he starts to really worry about his mom and dad. He was wondering if they were safe, if they were still alive. Then Fenton reassured himself that both of his parents are tough people and that they'll survive this. He'll see them again eventually, he said to himself in his mind. And then Fenton begins to get sleepy and sleepier until he drifts off to sleep on the couch watching the TV. But Fenton had the advantage. He could sleep peacefully. His house was very secured, as the zombies were outside in the front yard, now numbering several dozen, scratching against the steel shutters, trying to find a way into the house. This scenario was playing all over, up and down the eastern seaboard, as the news was reporting that now they were getting reports from the West Coast states and the Midwestern states that there were zombies out there too. And soon as the night progressed, reports were coming in that this was going on all over the world. Like and subscribe. The end.